David Nori and Angelique Nori and their beautiful girls have been friends of mine for quite some time, and I had the privilege of being able to speak at their very first conference in Nashville, Tennessee. Now, I asked David to come and weigh in on the conversations about a secret of a man's mind, especially pertaining to a married man. I absolutely adore the marriage and family that David and Angelique have created. Takes a special kind of guy. I love his story. I love his background. I love his passion. And I wanted us to know that there are amazing married men looking for amazing women like you, and he spills the tea on what married men really want. Some of us here are single and hoping to be married one day. You will be 4 steps ahead in your marriage. He gives a very, very candid response to some very taxing questions, but I don't want to leave anything out about David's professionalism, so let me just read his bio for you. David is the best-selling author of the books Pursuit and Turned On. He co-hosts the Turned On podcast with his wife Angelique and is a founder of Socially Speaking, an occupational training program designed to help entrepreneurs and professionals articulate their passions and products with a greater degree of charisma and marketability. Angelique and David have 3 children and devote their lives to creating stronger families and marriages through the fundamental wisdom of the Bible. So now to the interview with David. Yay. So, Mr. David Nori, let's get right into it now that we know who you are. And at the end, you're going to let us know how we're going to find you and we're going to find out all that good stuff. But everybody already knows that you're a dear friend of mine and they've already heard the intro. So let's get into it because I know you're raring to go. Now, David, how would you describe or what is a good married man? Because I know you're one of them and love you and Angelique. So I called you here because you two are like my one day couple. One day I'll be like these two. And I know that if I think you're great, so will all the black swans. So definitely give us your definition of a married man. What is that? Because there's so many definitions out here.
Well,
so
thank you.
One.
Here's the thing, from the outside, look, every marriage is going to have its struggles. I look at it, if you went to the supermarket and you were looking to 2 tomatoes, one would be super shiny and bright, and that's the GMO tomato, right? Yeah. And then you see this other tomato over there that's got bruises and it's dented, and to the naked eye, the bright shiny one looks like the one that you want, but really this dented one over here is the one that's the organic tomato. And I relate that to the marriage because this is the one that had to really go through a lot to survive. That's what the dents are from. That's what the discoloration is from. It's because that tomato had to fight organically to survive. So sometimes, guys, when you see a couple on like celebrity couple, or you see somebody who looks perfect on the outside, we got to be careful because a real marriage is one that is going to have its ups and downs, its pitfalls. When we take that vow, it says for better or worse, for richer or poorer. And those days will come for sure. And it's not that you won't have troubles. It's not that you won't face these things. It's that your vows have to be stronger and your commitment to one another has to overcome that. So what I call a God-shaped marriage or a great marriage for me is I'll use one word, and that's humility. If a husband and wife, if a man and woman can each exercise humility, and what my wife always says, and this is critical, is that we fight not for one another, we fight for each other. In other words, if we go to our separate corners, we want to win for ourselves, it's never going to work out. We have to want to win for the sake of the marriage. And sometimes that means, being humble or giving up a little bit without sacrificing who you are.
Love it. So, David, you were telling us, and correct me if I'm wrong, that a good married man, the kind of man that black swans need to be looking for, is a man that has humility.
Yeah, and I think humility is one of those things that you just don't have automatically. I think you learn to have it. And look, I was Chengi.
Yeah.
Look at pride.
Yes.
Pride.
Yeah.
Is a killer. Pride came this close to killing my relationship. I have 3 young, beautiful girls from this relationship. I have a wonderful wife, but it was this close to being thrown away because of that one thing, and it's pride. And pride is the opposite of humility.
Wow. I know, David, I love this because we've had this conversation a few times. I remember when I was in Nashville, and you've always brought that up. And I think it's just so powerful, because I think it's one of the things that we don't address in relationships, but it's usually the number one killer, really. And I love your particular story, because so few men are able to own up to the fact that it was actually my pride that could have lost me. And ladies, Angelique and the girls are amazing. Love them. They're just amazing. And we'll have Angelique here, I'm sure, at some point. I'll drag her on. But, that for me is the highest form of humility that I've seen you display, because you have so much to offer the world. You're such a magnetic, amazing, big man in the world. But what I love about you is your ability to own that piece about yourself and change that. And I feel that women, we are more drawn to arrogance, and that that thing that we don't realize that sometimes is going to be the very thing that's going to be our undoing. So love that.
Well, I mean, there's two sides there. You want a man who obviously is confident, right? And let's not confuse confidence with pride. I mean, some people might say that.
Yeah,
very different. Pride is the destroyer. Confidence is a good quality we want in a man. So yeah, I see that, how those two can be confused easily.
Absolutely. So how do you tell the difference, David? What's the difference?
I hate to say it, but guys, it's maturity. It really is. I mean, you'd want this magic thing. And if I could talk to younger people or even older men, because I really wasn't a young man when I found that. I was 36 when I met Angelique. So it was 37 when pride really reared its ugly head. And so if I could say one thing, it's experience. And here's the thing, this is critical. She's a strong woman, and any woman can be a strong woman, and one of the things is, and I wrote my book about this experience, and I was talking to Angelique about it, because what happened was I was ready to walk out when we were engaged. She actually put her ring on the table, and I was ready to walk away because I didn't want to give up my individuality. I don't want to give up going out with my guy friends. I was prideful. Mm-hmm. And here she was, who she had really, I had no business being with her, Chengi. She was, when they say a guy outkicks his coverage, I mean, I way outkicked this coverage. It's amazing. And even though I outkicked my coverage, and you would look and say she could have any man, she said something when I was writing this book that I think is very critical. She said, David, you were stubborn with pride. And if I thought that I could have won you back or transformed you on my own, I could have done it with sex. I could have done it by manipulation. I could have allowed you to walk all over me. Mm-hmm. She goes, but thankfully, I was mature enough, meaning Angelique, she says, I was mature enough spiritually that she knew that she couldn't convict me with her flesh by herself, that she could only convict me with Jesus. And the only way that she was going to reach me was with his word. And she did that because I had rejected her. And I was ready to, even though I knew in my head that my life would be terrible without her, I was ready, because pride was such a strong emotion and it had overtaken me. I was ready to leave it all behind based on that.
Wow.
And if I could just say one more thing, I wanted to get this right. So it's the First Corinthians. It's from Paul. And this was critical. Paul says in First Corinthians, he says, when I was a child, I spoke like a child. I understood as a child. I thought like a child. But when I became a man, it came time to put those childish things behind me. And at 37, in an instant, when she asked me to read that verse with her, she didn't force it on me. She didn't humiliate me. She didn't give me an ultimatum. She said, please read this. And Chengi, I'll tell you what, for me, literally in an instant, it went right from my eyes to reading it and my lips to right to my heart. And it changed me, literally changed me.
Wow. You are the second guy we've brought on here who is amazing, that has spoken about the woman being the life force to his transformation and her spirituality being part of that piece. And David, we're just going to go to the second question, which is, what kind of spirituality does a woman have to be able to have that kind of power on that kind of stubborn heart?
So it's a Proverbs 31 woman. And it's a woman who's strong, but a woman who still recognizes the man as what we call the head of the household. And let's not get that confused these days. In the age of women's empowerment, if you quote some of these biblical principles of marriage and you say a woman recognizes the man, that doesn't mean that the man is her master. That doesn't mean that the woman is subservient. It means that they have a mutual respect for one another. And she expects the man to do the things that God calls a man to do, to provide for the family, to keep her safe, to love her. You know, the Bible puts man and woman like the relationship between Jesus Christ and the church. Love your wives as I love the church. Well, there's no greater love than that. So I think a spiritual woman is a woman who is grounded in who she is.
Yeah.
Don't be fooled. Men want a strong woman. And ladies, if you think your man doesn't want a strong woman, then maybe it's time to look for somebody else, because her strength and her spirit, again, without condescending, without being domineering, right? Because it was with her love and her humility that broke me down.
Yeah.
So you can't beat a guy down. You have to break him down internally. There's something in here in every man, no matter how tough he projects himself to be, that can be broken down by a godly woman.
Wow. You're preaching a whole sermon.
David, this is my most passionate thing. I lived it. I felt it. Again, this close to losing everything that I have now, looking back on it, it's real. I can't preach it any harder than that.
Yeah, it's a whole sermon. And I'm so glad you're saying this, because the two men that have said this are men of God, men of stature, men who really women want at the end of the day. And you were saying, look, your strength is not a problem. Your strength is not a problem. And what I love about what you just said is that your strength in submission and in service is powerful. It's not about beating the man down and being a bigger man than him and moving in masculine energy and setting down the law. It's enough strength that Angelique had to say, look, I have enough fortitude to work with this man, to not just cast him aside or diminish him. That's the kind of strength. And anybody who knows Angelique, she is one hell of, she's my sister.
Yeah. And she literally, she could do it because she's a third degree black belt. So she's a strong woman spiritually, but physically, she's a strong woman.
She is mentally, emotionally, but the kindest, warmest, gentlest soul. She is the Proverbs 31 woman indeed. So you really lucked out there, David. God loves you. But you were right for it too.
Yeah, I asked him for a godly woman. I literally prayed for a woman. I said, send me an angel, and her name is angel-like. It's Angelique, but it's in the Greek. There's no Q in the alphabet, the Greek alphabet. So people literally call our house going, is angel-like there? Because when you read it, it looks like angel-like. And so sometimes God says, hey, you know what? You prayed for an angel. I'm giving you a girl that people call angel-like. I mean, hey, do you need a bigger clue than that? Wake up, son. You're going to turn from a boy into a man in one day. You got a lot of work to do. And this was the woman who led me there.
Love it. Absolutely love it.
Absolutely blessed.
You guys work so beautifully together. You're a real harmony. You know, I always say to my followers, when I see couples, I always know when things are not right. I don't even have to be around them long. And you guys don't have the perfect marriage. No one does. But definitely when I'm spending time with you two, when I've spent time with you two in person, especially, you've always had this harmony. And even when you're having your quiet fights, no one actually knows you're having a fight because it's on such a subliminal level. And there's respect in it. You know, and I remember when we were driving to the Turned On conference, and, you know, Angelique wasn't feeling good. And you're like, can I pray for you? And I was like, oh, we need more of those, Jesus, you know.
She taught me that, you know, I'm only reciprocating what she taught me. So that's one of the things I wasn't comfortable praying out loud. And God calls us, Jesus says, you know, you're supposed to be the leader of the family. You pray out loud over your wife, for your wife. Yeah. And when you do that, everything changes. I was talking to a man yesterday who's having some marital problems. Mm-hmm. And I said, look, I'm always going to tell you one thing first and above all else. When you start praying out loud over your wife with her so she can hear you, and not in repetitive, habitual, ritual prayer, but when you talk to God and you intercede and you bring him into that marriage, everything changes. Wow. 100%. And I read a statistic. So religious couples, this is going to fascinate you. Couples who identify as being religious, their divorce rate is really only slightly better, like a couple percentage points better than those who don't identify as being religious. That's being religious. Now, here's the other part. Couples who pray together out loud and pray together, less than 1% chance of divorce. So that's significant. We're talking people who identify as religious. We may even go to church together. You still don't have any really much better of a chance of not getting divorced than a couple who does it. But when you pray out loud together, it goes way down to 1%. I mean, it's a huge difference, because there's a huge difference between saying I'm religious and we go to church than saying, hey, God, I'm going to pray for you, with you, over my wife right now, and I want her to hear this, and vice versa. It's a game.
That's a heart game. That's a heart game, and that's a vulnerability game, to pray over your wife, with your wife. That's a heart game. Religion is
to God. You can't, even when she does it, when we lay our head down, and you said when we're fighting, and we lay our head down. Sometimes I'm like this, I'm facing away from her, right? I'm in my mind, I'm like, I can't believe she said that. I can't believe that we're not agreeing on this. And she, in a humble nature, starts praying out loud. She's like, and she always says what she's thankful for first. This is the key, right? Men, you don't go right to the point of the matter. Heavenly Father, thank you for my husband. Thank you that he loves me. Thank you that he's such a good provider. Thank you that he's a humble man. God, I would ask for that you let him have a little bit more humility today. I would ask that you let him see this. And so what happens is, it's not in a manipulative prayer. It's asking God to come into it and pray to it, but it's a third party. And if you can't lie to God, if you do, then you got some serious issues. But when your partner hears this, when your spouse hears this, and you're there together, even if you're not married, right? And you're praying out loud over each other, it does this. It's amazing.
Okay. So David, what are your expectations? What were your expectations of Angelique with your family? What is this godly husband man that we're all praying for? What does he expect? How does he expect us to conduct himself around family, business, colleagues? What kind of woman is he looking for?
Well, I think we're going back to that point where every man wants to feel like he's a man. And as strong as Angelique is, she never tries to emasculate me.
Yeah.
Right. She always puts that first. But at the same time, we need a strong woman. And here's the thing: what does a man look for? Well, for the most part, I got to be honest with you. I looked for all the wrong things. You know, I looked for someone who was beautiful on the outside. I looked for someone who is gonna, like all the things that I like to do. And Angelique and I really are kind of opposite. She doesn't like the things that I like. And at first, I was like, is this going to work out? It worked out because we both had marriage and a foundation as our highest value that we wanted. We both had God in the center of that. And the little things like what kind of music we listened to, what kind of food we liked, what kind of TV shows or movies we liked, which you thought would be such a big deal. Like we don't have anything in common. Yeah. It's so minuscule now. Yeah. And most of all, Chengi, it's trust. Yeah. Let me talk about this for 1 second. This was a lesson I learned. When I first met Angelique, I love hip hop. I love to dance. And she was like, it's okay, but that's not me. Like, I don't like hip hop. I'm not going to talk about music a lot and I don't dance a lot. Yeah. And I was so young and immature. I thought this was going to be a huge problem.
Yeah.
But I knew I could trust her. So think about this. We're 11 years into our marriage right now. Let me just ask you a simple question. At 11 years with 3 kids, is it more important for me that Angelique likes hip hop and to dance? Or is it more important that she could go away and I could trust her in any situation at any time, that I never have to doubt my wife, that I have ultimate trust in her faith and her loyalty to me and vice versa? See how we think so immaturely sometimes? Oh my God, she doesn't like the same movie. She doesn't like the same music. Yeah. And you realize a decade into a marriage, that's this much of it. But trust is everything.
Yeah.
We have to be able to trust our spouse with our life, with our heart. And if you don't have that, you have nothing.
100%. Okay. So when you were introducing her to your family, were you just like, look, as long as she's pretty and well behaved? Or were you thinking, you know what, as long as I can trust her, whether she gets on with my family or not, whether she gets on with my colleagues or not, doesn't matter, as long as I can trust her? What was your...
Well, here's the funny part. Today is literally my parents' 63rd wedding anniversary. They're visiting.
Oh, wow.
63 years of marriage. Wow. They still hold hands. They still fight. They fight quite good, but 63 years. So they set a good example. Now, Angelique's parents divorced. They separated after 2 years. They divorced when she was 7. Yeah. So, when I first introduced her to my family, here's the thing. My family probably was like, finally a nice girl. Cause I had introduced I had brought so many girls to my parents that were like, I know, like they were too nice inside, but inside they were thinking, David, like, really, this is who you're bringing home? Like you're being an older man now and you're not acting like an older man. But you always want your parents to like them. But here's the thing. And this is so important to your audience. Angelique is so far removed from my mom. It's different. It's a different generation.
Wow.
They're both equally good. They're both equally great to their husbands. But a woman my mother's age was brought up in a different generation than Angelique was. And this was a problem at the beginning. My dad didn't understand that. Wow. My dad didn't. Angelique was a strong woman. And as a man, you're like, when she's saying something to you and she's speaking her mind and your dad's like, you're going to let your wife talk to you like that? And in my mind, I'm saying, it's not her talking to me like that, Dad. This is the woman of this generation was brought up differently. It's not any different. I mean, better or worse, it's just a different thing. And I think we all see that. Yeah. So you're not going to be married to your mother. You want some of those qualities, but you can't treat a woman like your dad treated your mom. It just won't work these days.
Absolutely. You know what I love about what you just said is And I think this is what makes you a man like yourself really special, because you didn't disqualify her because your parents didn't understand her. In fact, you try to sort of bridge that gap between them. And I think there's a lot of, look, if my family don't like you, up the door kind of thing. But you were kind of like, look, I've got this treasure, and her heart is similar to my mom's, and her values are right. But there's this generational thing, and you were able to do that translation between yourself and your parents.
I'll give you a very specific example, and it comes down to the details. You know, when we're talking about this, it's important because some men are like, I can't displease my father, or a woman, I can't displease my mother.
Of course.
It's the tiniest thing. Our child is a year and a half old, and we're staying with my parents, and my parents want to give her cookies. Now, my wife is very much into organic and clean living, and she's like, I don't want her to have cookies. So it's a little tiny thing.
Yeah.
What my parents don't understand is when they had cookies, when they were young, it was sugar and flour.
Yes.
And now cookies are red dye number 4, yellow dye number 7, hydrogenated, all this stuff.
Yes.
And so my wife goes down for a nap in the spare room, and my dad is loud and he's talking. Who does she think she is? We can give our daughter cookies and she's not going to, talk to us like that or reject it. And so she's awake and she can hear this. So this was the first major thing in our marriage. She comes to me and she goes, I just heard your dad talking about me, and it wasn't very nice. So now I'm like, I have my dad on one side and my wife on the other. And I'm like, I got to stick up for my wife.
Yeah.
And so it was the hardest thing I ever had to do. And I came out of that room and I said, Mom, Dad, we need to talk.
Right.
Now, I'm 40 years old at this time, 41. I'm not a young man. And I said, look, that's my wife. And these are her rules. That's her child and our child. And it's not the same way. And you need to respect that,
Right.
And you can't, it's not your way or the highway anymore. So that was the first time I had to go to bat for my wife and actually confront my parents. And, it was one little tiny conversation over a cookie, the tiniest little thing. Yeah. But it was a big step for us because my wife needed to see that I was going to stick up for her and not just be like, well, that's my dad, I can't say anything. Does that make sense?
Love it. Absolutely makes sense. And I feel that a lot of women just want that. They want that feeling. They want to know that, he's got my back, not to kind of argue or fight or kind of fall out of grace with a man's parents, but just that feeling that I got you and you've got me. I love that. Let's move on. So what are your core needs, David, or the core needs of a man such as yourself in a relationship? Emotional core needs. What are the emotions that need to be ministered to you or respected?
So emotionally, that's a tough one. We're seeing such an attack on masculinity, and I'm really big on being a godly man, but I'm not, I don't need to cry with other guys. I don't need to be hugged. If it happens, it happens. I'm not afraid to cry. Yeah. And if I need to hug somebody, I need to hug somebody, but I'm not going to go seek that out in groups and have someone make me cry or tap into this emotion. What I need from my wife emotionally is I need a rock there. Someone who's ready to listen to me, and I'm ready to say, hey, you know what? I'm scared about this, this, and this. Sometimes I've been scared about my health. Hey, babe, I've had this chest pain and I'm scared about that. I need her to be strong for that. Sometimes it's, I need you to build me up. Yeah. We go at different points where, my book comes out, I'm riding high, and I'm feeling strong. And then she's like, hey, I need to do my thing now. And at a different time, I need to be able to support her when she's riding high, but we work together. So every single day we are kind of each one's motivational coach. Yeah. I love that. And I think another gentleman said the same thing in terms of just having that person who's got your back and who supports you and, who is strong enough for those moments where you just need to not to be afraid, and she's not going to judge that and perceive that as weakness. And she's going to hold you up because she's got the strength for that. And I feel that that's a really legitimate, I'm sure all core needs are legitimate, but I feel that's a really masculine need for a man like yourself. So next one, David, what are your greatest fears in a relationship? What do you fear the most in your relationship? Letting her down. That's a big fear, letting her down. Every man wants to, and sometimes we get lazy. Sometimes we get comfortable. Yeah. And a woman won't always say it. She'll hint at it. And so what we have to do is when we catch those hints, if you don't, you'll fall asleep at the wheel. If you put your marriage on cruise control, you'll fall asleep at the wheel. And sometimes it's too late. Yes. Sometimes a wife won't come out and say, hey, you haven't been providing this for me. You haven't been doing this for me. Sometimes it's like she's at her wit's end. Now, I don't agree with that, ladies. Always don't use innuendo. Sometimes we're hard-headed. Yeah. And you think you're letting us know and you're not. And then it comes to the point where it's too late. And you're like, why didn't you ever tell me that? Yeah.
100%.
It's important to use subtlety, but sometimes you have to be direct.
Yeah. I love that. And I say that to the girls all the time. The men just need us to be clear and very direct and respectful. It's, you can be direct with a man and respectful. But I think women are afraid that if they're too direct, it's going to be read as disrespect. But that's usually, and I think you've made this very clear that, they are married men who are mature, wise and humble, and then there are men who are not. And I think if you are married to a man that is not wise, mature and humble, he's probably going to not be able to take direct communication, whichever way it's presented. And of course it requires the woman too to have the understanding of what is respectful when she is talking to a man. But I think that if a man truly loves you and is mature and you speak to him respectfully and clearly, he will respect that, and the chance of him letting you down. And I love that you said that, because I said that at the Secrets of a Man's Mind thing that I did, that, men are afraid to let us down. That is one of their biggest fears, and I think women don't realize that, because in culture we hear, the old dogs and the old this and the old that. But in truth, and this is why I wanted to do the series, because I want women to know that men like you actually exist and functioning in relationships and with husbands, and that can be hopeful, right? And realize that when they are in a relationship with a good man, that he is afraid to hurt her, that he doesn't think it's sport to disappoint her or let her down.
Okay, so that's a good point. The word disappoint. I always look back at my parents, and when they raised me, they really didn't punish me a lot. They didn't spank me. They didn't really have to ground me, because they instilled this thing in me that I didn't want to disappoint them. That was I could have gotten away with stuff, but my whole thing is, geez, this would disappoint my parents. So take that into your marriage. There could be a time, with fidelity, right? You can think, well, my wife will never find this out, or if I look at this web page or something, she'll never find this out. But it's not just about whether she'll find out. It's if she did, how would that feel? You don't want to disappoint her, because then she'll never look at you the same way again. You want your wife to hold you on a pedestal, and you don't want to do anything to knock you off that pedestal, even if it's not physical. It's mental, it's emotional. So I never want to disappoint her, even emotionally, even to the point where it could open the door for something.
Yeah, love it. Next question, David. What do you desire but are afraid to ask for? Or what do men in your position desire, who are married, really desire, but they're afraid to ask for, afraid to mention?
Well, certainly there's the emotional support that we talked about. Here we go, emotional and sexual. All right. I mean, the Bible, here's what I learned from the Bible that I never knew is that God wants you to have a great sex life when you're married. Yes. In a marriage, you're supposed to, it says, rejoice in the wife of your youth. Let her breast fill you at all times. Be intoxicated with her love. Yes. It says, do not deprive one another of sex. Yes. Except when you go to prayer, because if you deprive one another, that's when you can get tempted. So one of the things, you have to have a really openness about sex. Men, we're just, look, that's the way we're wired. It's on our minds 24/7, and sometimes women are not. Or here's the biggest misconception, Chengi. I was under the misconception that as soon as you get married, then you can have sex anytime you want, right? It's like, you're the man. now is what I want. And you forget that you always have to, women are intoxicated with romance. You have to work for it, I mean, you work. This is back before I was married. I had a lot of times when I wasn't saved yet. And you work for that. And then as if you get married and you don't have to work for it. So I probably, if I had to do it over again, I would be celibate until the time I was married. But I wasn't saved. Until later on in life. So I tried to live that life, but I fell short, and it's something I have to deal with.
And I think many of us have to deal with that as well. But what I love is that you and all the gentlemen that I've been asking have come up with that particular one. And it's really important that it goes across, and that whether you're a good man or not so great guy, this is something that you desire in your relationship, for it to be good and for there to be willingness, and for you to not feel like you have to beg all the time. But what I love with you is you understand that there's a currency for it too. And that is being romantic and caring and working for a little bit. Now, obviously, I think you don't want to feel like you have to work for it every single time. Buy me roses. No, tell me I'm pretty. At some point that I was talking to somebody and saying that we have discarded this idea of duty in relationships, right? And we've made it a dirty word. There is a duty to be in service to one another in that way, but it doesn't mean that it has to be a horrible job. But at some points, it just has to be a duty, and I believe the Bible talks about that in terms of Paul, don't deprive each other. So, okay, sometimes the romance is not here today, girls. Okay, he's not being very romantic. Okay, he usually is, but not today. Right. But at this point, we engage our sense of duty to one another, just like he has to provide out of duty, not all the time, not because he wants to, not because he wants to go out there and be the guy that gets it done all the time, but he has a duty to his family. So I feel like when we reintroduce and make duty a noble thing, it will help bring that balance.
Yeah, it's an important thing. And again, not enough couples talk about it because it's not coached on. You just don't know how to do it. And so people say, well, how do I bridge that conversation? How do I have that conversation? If your parents don't talk to you about it, if the church doesn't talk to you about it, you're just supposed to know. And that's why you have to be completely an open book. You just trust and honesty. It's talked about so much in marriage, but do you practice trust and honesty? Yeah. Can you talk to your spouse about anything? Hey, babe, sex, this is important.
Yeah. And can you make it safe for your spouse to ask for what they want and be honest without any punitive responses?
Yeah, right. We'd save a lot of marriages if we talked about that,
Yeah. And made it safe. It's okay for you to have a difference of opinion, to want something that I'm not ready, willing, or able to give you. And I'm not going to judge you for it. I'm not going to start calling you names and putting you in a box and treating you funny. And, I'm going to make it okay for you to have your desires, your needs. And then I believe that when we create an atmosphere for honesty for one another, then we have more honesty. Because the truth is, people are not honest because they're afraid of the punishment for the most part. And sometimes the punishment isn't as explicit. It's usually the silent treatments and the weird energy that we're all avoiding at the end of the day. So then we veer away from sensitive conversations, and then one has unmet needs, and they're sitting in this relationship with this terribly unmet need. There's so much research, that I was reading the other day of married men who've gone for 6 months to a year to 3 years without any sexual intimacy with their partners. And I'm sure the first time they said they were punished. Don't you want, whatever the situation. I'm sure it happens for women as well. But it's really having that safe space. And then, of course, when he leaves or finds somebody else or falls into temptation elsewhere, then he's the big bad wolf. And I'm not saying that we're not responsible for ourselves, but we have to understand that, home and the marriage, that's where we create those environments. The safety.
It's a great topic, and I think if we're going to save marriage and we're going to save the sanctity of marriage, we have to be able to have the difficult conversations. You did a great 100%. Way of holding that as well. I mean, it's important.
100%. I love that. Thank you for sharing that openly and being honest. That's amazing. Okay, so money and relationship and marriage. How should it move? How does it move in your home, if you're comfortable to say?
Well, we know, or we should know, the statistic is that, finances and financial difficulty and money is probably the number one reason that people get divorced. And so, in today's day and age, like we said, women not only they want to, they want to go out there, they want to be competitive in the workforce. It is a woman's world right now. Mm-hmm. I tell, my wife every day that I would want her for a business partner over any other man out there. Yeah. But money is a hard thing. We like to spend our money on different things. When the money problems come up, it's usually one of the most heated arguments because we hold things back. Right. We hold things back, and then all of a sudden it comes out, well, you bought this, or you wanted this, or we spent money on this, and this is not as important as what you wanted. And then it becomes this, we get really defensive when it comes to money. Mm-hmm. So, and Angelique's better with numbers than I am. She just is. She's better with money and finances. It's just not my forte. Mm-hmm. But we have to realize it's a responsibility for each of us. God calls us to be providers. Yeah. And it's if we just get things out in the open and we are not trying to hide something, it's always easier. It's when you try and hide something or when you hold something back, and then all of a sudden the vile words come out of your mouth and the blame. Mm. That's when it gets heated and ugly.
Yeah. Do you think that there are men who get resentful about being providers? Because I get a lot of that when I do sort of videos. I get a lot of, and I'm not sure if it's a general feeling or what's happening, because I'm really trying to understand it, because you speak of it so naturally, but I know it's not felt across the board. What are your thoughts?
They get resentful because there has to be that open communication. I mean, if you're constantly providing, and this is not my case because we're completely equal, but I know other men that are constantly providing, and what happens is it's just a give, take. So sure, you'd be resentful, but that's something you can't wait until you establish a pattern deep into the relationship, because then it's going to seem odd. These are things you have to talk about early and often, and set expectations. Because I think what happens is some men, when they're trying that courtship phase and they want to buy everything and they want to do everything, and then that becomes this give and take. And next thing you know, you're 3 to 5 years into a relationship, or even if it's 3 to 5 months, right? And you're like, wait a minute, this isn't how it's supposed to be. Now you have something that's like, well, we're already deep into this. I think that's the big problem, is people wait too long to discuss these things. If you see the relationship is getting serious, you can't suddenly change. It's the same thing 100%. With sex. If you're having a lot of sex at the beginning of a marriage, and then something changes, like, wait a minute, what's the change here? This is the standard that you set. Well, it's the same thing with money. These are the big things that break people up. So again, talk about them early, talk about them often, as your body changes, as your finances changes, as your sex drive changes, as your situation changes. Those topics are going to have different factors. You're different at 50 than you are at 30. 100%. And financially. So you can't use the same parameters, but you have to be really open and honest. I mean, we say it all the time, but people just don't do it. Saying 100%. It and practicing it are two different things. And it's ugly because you want to say, oh, instead of us talking about finances tonight, let's just watch a movie. And we put it on the back burner. And then it doesn't go away. It festers and it grows. So then it becomes a really big problem in the relationship.
100%. And I've always said that I feel that, we give people driver's licenses after they've done theory tests and practice and gone through this rigorous whatever. But when it comes to marriage licenses, I don't know what it's like in the US, but certainly here, you just go and tell them the address, you give a few details, and now you're ready to enter into this contract for life, in a very difficult space. And nobody requires you to at least have some kind of test that you would have passed. And my whole thing is, I feel that I want to create a system eventually where, people need to get a license and actually earn that license. And I truly believe that people need to have these conversations, and they need to actually prove that these conversations have happened. And they need to be asked specific questions about finance, about sex. I have had so many married recently with, the academy opening up to men who've been in relationships for 10 years and haven't had sex with their partners. I mean, this is heartbreaking to me. Okay. And these are men of God, pastors, leaders. These are not just random on the street guys. And, then of course I meet with the wives to find out, and they've been married for decades, and he has no idea that she has any sexual trauma. I am the first person to know, and he's been married to her. And I'm thinking, we can, sadly, that relationship was not able to make it, but well, it's still a work in progress. But, for me, it's a shame, because they should have never, ever, ever walked up the aisle until those things were disclosed and discussed. And the problem is, I think, especially for the Christians or the religious people, let's put it that way, is we feel God is going to make up for those pieces. But God is in wisdom, right? He says, by wisdom, a house is established. God wants us to have these conversations, even about what our expectation sexually is, even about our sex drive. What are you going to expect when we get married? What do you want? Every day? Okay, I can't do every day, right? Let's negotiate that. Let's get into this situation super clear. Of course, when we get into it, we're going to have to negotiate again, because the experiences are going to be different. The circumstance, children are going to come into it. So I feel that we cheapen the entry to marriage. And I think it needs to be a little bit more robust, and getting a marriage license should sort of come with, right, we've done this premarital course. We've had these conversations, because I reckon if people have those courses, they would not waste, 20, 30 years of your lives, even 15
How
years
much,
of
I
your
mean,
lives.
how much of ourselves do we want to reveal? That's what it comes down to. When you're asking these questions, you're revealing a certain part of yourself that some people, they feel like, well, geez, if this person really knew me, maybe they wouldn't want to marry me. And so it's scared. So we hold some of that stuff back. And that's why, going to some type of counseling, we had a great counselor. We got married in a Greek church. My wife's Greek Orthodox, and Greek priests can get married. And so he had some great advice for us. And we went through all kinds of, exercises and talks and stuff like that. And it was fantastic. And look, here we are, now we're not in the Greek church anymore, but that was a great start to our marriage. And I think what happens is as a man, at the beginning of our relationship, for me, it was all about how I looked, my body, how I looked. I was romantic as well. I did all those things, but now it's changed, now as I'm getting older, it's not as much about my body as more what I can provide for her emotionally, or as I can be a father and a husband. But I have to reveal these things. And if we have this kind of convoluted barrier up from our emotional side, then all of a sudden that's going to come out sooner or later. And it's, instead of a small crack, it's going to be the dam is going to break. And again, I think you're onto something. We need to know more about our partners and be like, okay,
100%.
here's a realistic idea of what it's going to take, rather than let's just keep secrets and hope that it works out.
Yeah, and hope that mix in a bit of Holy Spirit, and I believe
practical and a spiritual and an emotional side, like you're saying, and they all are.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I want to save marriages, but I know we will save them better if we start them right and give them strong and good foundations, but that's a really good segue to the next question. We're talking about honesty and vulnerability and sex. Now, do you think you would have cared if Angelique's body count was high, or if she had maybe some sexual abuse trauma? Do you think that would have swayed your decision as to whether you'd marry her or not?
If I'm being honest,
of course,
probably. I don't think it would have prevented me from marrying her, but that's a tough question, because we're so hypocritical. Men, we are so hypocritical. We want to be, spread our seed, conquest, and, and sow our oats, but we want our woman to be a virgin. And if we knew that about her, and sometimes it's like, here's the other part of what we just talked about. Is it better what you don't know? I mean, we kind of got to have an idea. You don't want to be totally surprised. You don't want to be walking down the street, everybody's looking at you going, hey, yeah, right. But you don't have to, I don't believe in sharing numbers, I mean, and we look past those things.
Yes.
But I mean, that's a totally hypocritical thing. Men and women are totally treated different, and their expectations are different, and it's unfair, but I look at some of my guy friends that are, I'm thinking, especially in the age of social media, right? Where everything's on record and people can pull up pictures from years ago. I mean, if you marry someone, guys, now, and that woman thinks you're a good person, and then she finds out later on that, it's not going to be good. The thing goes both ways. You don't want your wife to think that you were some kind of male prostitute out there. I mean, that's not going to look good for her. She's not going to think the same as you.
Yeah.
So it's a tough question. I mean, there's really no easy answer. That's you'd like to say everything perfect there, but I mean, emotional trauma is probably a little bit different than promiscuity. You think you like to know a person. So it's tough.
Yeah. I mean, here are the hard facts. I mean, I'm all for looking at things for the way that they are. And I always say to the girls, and this is something that Dr. Pat Allen always says, that men marry virtue, not vaginas. And, the idea that virtue still matters, it just does. I talk to my 16-year-old and, it matters to him. Okay. And that's not something that, people could say he was socialized into it. It's actually a masculine thing. And that is indeed unfair. No one's debating that. But I feel like if we understand in the same way as women, I always say to women, look, do you want to be with a broke guy or a guy who's never built anything? That's a bit unfair. Surely you should go out into the world and make money. And, we have certain natures that come with being born male or female. And I'm sure we are all trying to be fair, but it doesn't change the nature of things. And I don't think it's, I know the question is quite difficult, but I don't think a lot of men are moronic. I genuinely think that if you meet a woman who, at the point you meet her, is virtuous and has turned her life around. And what I love about what you said is you don't need a number, but you do need an indication of one's past, right?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you don't need to know details. Sometimes, what you don't know, but you don't want to totally surprise somebody. But yeah, you don't need numbers. And I think one of the big mistakes people make, and I've seen it ruin relationships, is you don't talk about exes in relationships, especially if you're in a marriage, I've seen too many people say, oh, well, my ex-boyfriend, I've had people mention, oh, this guy was my ex-boyfriend, or this guy was hitting on me, or a guy says, oh, these are my conquests or whatever. And it's disrespectful to your spouse. It's totally disrespectful, and it's unneeded. If you're doing it to build up your own ego, then you got to do an ego check. Why would you need to tell your spouse about your conquest to build up who you are? At the same point, it says something about a woman if she talks about this guy was hitting on me, or this guy was my ex-boyfriend. It's in the past. Leave it in the past.
Absolutely.
It can do no good in this conversation with your current relationship. It does no good.
Yeah.
And especially if you're using it as a weapon, then it's even worse.
Absolutely. Totally agree with that. And that's the maturity piece, David, that you mentioned earlier. That's the grown-up part. I think in that there's wisdom too. And I really feel like conversations of that nature, if they're going to happen, if they have to happen, a mature third party, a trusted third party needs to be able to adjudicate that conversation, because they're never really good to handle. But, again, unless you were Mary Magdalene or, Rahab, then perhaps we kind of need to know. But for the most part, we can all admit that, look, I haven't walked the straight and narrow for as long as I would have loved to, just like you were saying, I wish I'd actually taken a different route before, but that's not how life presented itself. But guess what? We're talking to an incredible man that we all want to meet, a man like David. So, that's what matters. And I'm sure that's what Angelique was like, I can work with this, because I'm sure she had an idea of your past. But she was like, there's still this. And I'm going to.
I'll tell you the honest truth. I was always cognizant of it. Even when I was single, I was cognizant of that fact of what it would, when I meet the one that day, I was cognizant of my reputation. Now, that doesn't mean my reputation didn't precede me. I was cognizant of it. But what happened was, people will say things that aren't true. But I know I got to be able, at the end of the day, I got to be able to look my wife in the eye and be honest with her and say, this is maybe what you heard, but this is the truth. I was always cognizant. I never told somebody I loved them if I didn't. And if I walked out of situations where the sex would have been easy, but I said, I'm not going to just have sex for the sake of having sex.
Yeah.
Like I was cognizant of that. Maybe it's because I had older sisters. Maybe it's because I was raised with some faith at the time, that I knew it was going to be a factor one day. I didn't want my wife to look at me and say, wow, I have no respect for you. You were a male pig.
Yeah. And I love that too, that you were cognizant of that. And I think many men aren't. I think not many, but some men are not cognizant. I think because the culture has always made it okay for men to sow their royal oats or their wild oats, that I think men kind of feel that, well, I'm a man and I'll be able to get away with it. But indeed, when you meet a woman like Angelique, who is high value, she's going to care. Yeah. And I think some men don't ever realize that when they are ready to settle down and ready to get married, and they're going to want a different type of woman, and that woman, she'll care. Yeah. She'll care about your past. Not a lot, but she will care. Yeah. I
mean, it's, you always want to have mutual respect, but
yeah.
And I think that's where the church, if I'm being very clear, I think that's where the church is missing a lot of it, because there's always this guilt, but guilt doesn't keep a young man from having sex.
No.
Guilt makes a man feel guilty. And that's what the church is typically taught is guilt. Yeah. What they don't teach is mutual respect. What they don't teach is how will your wife look upon you someday?
Love that.
How would you feel if you had to tell your wife every detail of what happened to you in your 20s? Yeah. You would feel embarrassed. So it's not about guilt. It's about mutual respect.
100%. I love that. I love that, David. I really do. I do believe that we sell guilt more than we sell the real stuff, which is that mutual respect, I
just think that, when I got older and I went to pastors who preached about what a godly man should be like, and they talked to me like a man rather than just go to a church and say, you're going to go to hell for having sex. It's amazing. We would risk going to hell for having sex rather than, being talked to like an adult from a guy who's in a relationship and says, do you want your wife to think about this someday? Do you want your children to respect you someday? So why would you act like that now?
Yeah.
We got to have better mentorship from godly men in the church.
And amen.
Yeah.
Finally,
okay,
let's talk about conflict resolution, David.
Gosh, this is my good one here. I've gotten a lot of lessons.
You would have a lot of lessons. You would have a lot of lessons.
I was terrible at it.
You were. Tell us all about it.
I was the worst. And I talk to men about this all the time in counseling, is we tend to be avoiders. We run, right? In my book, I said, Jonah ran from responsibility. God said, you're going to go to Nineveh and you're going to send my message. And he ran. Men run. I ran because I got cold feet, but men run from hard conversations. We avoid things. Jonah went to sleep, right? In the belly of the ship. Before he went into the whale, he went down into the belly and he went to sleep to avoid it. And how do men sleep these days, avoiding conversations? Well, I'll just go to the sports pub and I'll watch sports, or I'll just have a few drinks and I'll ignore the conversation. I'll go hang out with my buddies, or I'll just not talk to my wife about this difficult conversation about conflict resolution. We can't avoid it because it always comes back. And if you're running from something, you can run and run, but it'll always catch up to you. And when it catches up to you, it's going to be worse. So what Angelique taught me is to not run. And she said, we will have this conversation tonight. We will. If we're up to 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, we're not going to go to bed feeling this way. We're not going to go to bed unresolved. And for me, it was so tough because I'd be like, I'm tired. Just let it go to the morning. It'll resolve itself overnight, as if some magical fairy will come in with resolution dust and resolve that problem. And you'll both wake up saying it's gone.
Yeah.
So that's where men have the biggest problem. Women want to talk, men want to avoid.
Right.
Women want conflict resolution. Men want to brush it under the rug.
Right.
Or push it down the street.
Yeah.
I had to learn this. As hard as it was, as stubborn as I was, as uncomfortable as it was.
Yeah.
She forced me to. Ladies, that's where you be strong. Do like Angelique did. Go, I know you're tired, sweetheart. And I know this is not something that you want to talk about. I know you'd rather do a million things right now than talk to me about this. But guess what? I don't care if it's 3 o'clock in the morning. We're going to talk about this until we get somewhere.
Yeah. And how long did she need to do that before you were ready to discuss stuff, David?
I've been married 11 years. She's still doing it. What do you
mean? Dear.
It's like, how long do you have to train your dog before he stops barking at cars passing by? I'm a man. She's going to be doing it for me for the rest of my life. I'm better at it. I'm just trying to be honest, guys. I'm better at it now. Like I see it coming. I know in my head, I go, you're not going to be able to go to sleep. Go around and face the music, start the conversation. Is it still be something that I would do? Chengi, is there ever going to be a day where I'm like, babe, we're not going to go to sleep? Probably not. It's probably not going to be my idea. But like I said, I know that it's for the good of the marriage, and she's right. It's never going to be our idea to do it. We're always going to be runners and hiders and sedators. That's the way men are.
So tell me, David, what could she possibly do in an argument or a fight or during conflict that would make you feel so deeply disrespected? What kind of stuff do you think would really kind of make a man shut down? Like, okay, you're not good at fighting, so I'm going to shut down and I'm never going to talk to you again. What kind of stuff is that? Obviously, Angelique is doing a good job because you're still talking to her, but in a situation, maybe from other men's experiences, or maybe an experience you've had and had to forgive.
Well, I've seen, again, what we just talked about. I've seen plenty of people bring up an ex. I've seen it ruin a marriage of someone very close to me, someone in my family. I was there for a lot of their fights, and every time they fought, she'd bring up that ex's name. He would do this, and then as soon as you do that, that's terrible. Yeah. It's a weapon, it's a spear, and it should never be brought up. So leave exes out of it. That's one thing. Leave the masculinity. A real man would do this. A real man would do that. Leave the name calling out. Angelique is good at this. She is. Gosh, she changed me so much, but in a way where she didn't whip me into that.
Yeah.
She used humility. Like I said at the beginning, she goes, I could have used, guilt. I could have used sex. I could have used anger, but she goes, I use the word of God. And I knew that if she pointed out what Paul said, for me, that would be like, she's like, hey, David, Paul says you got to become a man. It's right there in the word. You call yourself a godly man. You call yourself a purveyor of the word of God. It's what Paul says. He says, it's time to become a man and not be a child. What do you think? And then she does it because she's like, look, it's not for me. This is for us.
Yeah.
She's not keeping a scorecard. You know, one time I did this really cool picture. It was an old fashioned scoreboard, like for a soccer game, right? It said 3-2, right? And I put it above our bed. I superimposed it on a picture above our bed. And I'm like, you should never go to bed with a scorecard above your headboard saying who's winning and who's losing. Yeah. So when we do that and realize, hey guys, we're playing on the same team, you know, this is not Manchester U and Chelsea. We're all Man U here, you know? I'm you know what I'm saying?
Absolutely. I always say, you know, I think I read something and it said, it's us against the problem.
Yeah.
You know, you're not the problem. I'm not the problem. There's a problem. Let us get together and deal with that problem. And I think sometimes because the problem might be issuing from inside your spouse, you can think that's your problem and you've become the problem, but it doesn't matter who it's coming out of, it becomes our problem together. Yeah. And that takes a lot of growth, wisdom, and a lot of love. And
we go back to bluntness, Chengi. And like she'll say, hey, David, she's like, this is not a knock on you. I'm not trying to emasculate you. I'm not trying to hurt you. This is so we can get our finances better, or this is so we can have a date night. This is so we can be more intimate. This is so I can be happier and give to you what you need to be happy. Yeah. So it's not a knock on you. I'm not trying to fight with you. I'm not trying to break you down. I'm not trying to point the finger. I'm trying to have a real adult conversation with you. Yeah. So, you know, we need to be reminded of that in a way that's loving. And sometimes here's the biggest thing. I just had this conversation with a guy because he's like, sometimes it's the way my wife looks at me and says things. And I said, you know what? I totally get what you mean. What I can't stand is I hate the passive aggressiveness. Angelique knows. She's like, you know, I go, Ange, tell me, but don't do the passive aggressive stuff, because that's when I get really bogged up and defensive. And that's when I want to come out swinging. Just be honest with me. So sometimes, look, it's tone and body language. Yeah. 80% of communication is tone and body language. Yeah. You know, like 7 to 10% is what actually comes out of our mouth. 100%. So when you do these, you know, that stuff drives men crazy, whether you just, and men, I'm sure we have our own ways of doing things non-verbally that drive women crazy too.
Yeah. 100%. Love it.
Love. Say it with honesty. Be blunt.
Be blunt, ladies. Be blunt and respectful, but just say it. Yeah. No passive aggressive stuff. Men do not like passive aggressive. The good men don't like it. So if you want to keep one of those, we're going to have to go in there, say it like it is. Yeah. And if it's a real man, he can take it. And he will honor you for it.
When we talk about body language and that, imagine if your wife's got someone difficult to say, or husbands, if you got something difficult to say. Think about what a touch does. If she grabs my hand and puts her hand on top of mine and puts it on her leg and caresses me, you know, and looks me in the eye with love and the tone of her voice and say, you know what, this is a big issue for me. This is bothering me. And I know, you know, I know as my husband that you should want to make me feel better about this. And it's in the delivery. But sometimes when we get emotional, that's the last thing we're thinking about. We just want to hurl, you know, loud insults. Or slam doors. Who slam doors? You know, what we've seen with this crazy Johnny Depp trial. I watched 5 minutes of it. And I'm watching him slam cabinets and, you know, and I'm like, it takes two to tango. Yeah. You know, you really can't get anywhere by slamming doors.
No. And look, I love having you here. Now I'm going to have Angelique because, you know, you two are just a bomb, but I know I can always.
She taught me everything I know about this.
Absolutely. And we all know please let us know where we can find you. Tell us about your book. Tell us about your podcast. I love your podcast, by the way. Just tell us how everything is turned on.
You know, and it is a double entendre. Not really, but it's turned on is Matthew 5:14. You're the light of the world. You know, don't dim your light. So when I first came to her and she said, we got to do a podcast, I go, let's do one together. You know, we're better together. And she goes, well, what do you want to call it? I go, you know, I have this workbook that I did, and I have this little section in the workbook called Turned On. And turned on was like this metaphor for who's alert, who's ready to take control of their life, who's ready to bring light into the world. And she said, but, you know, aren't people going to think turned on means something else? And I said, well, yeah, let them, you know, and it was available, turnedon.com, right? Guys, turnedon.com. It's easy to find. It's easy to remember. And if people go there looking to get turned on for one way, no, we're going to turn you on in another way.
Love it.
So that's where you find the book. The book is called The Pursuit. It's about the foundational wisdom of God. There's a bunch of stuff in there about relationships. The other book is called Turned On. So there's 2 books. And you find them all at Turned On. You find our podcast at Turned On, turnedon.com.
Turnedon.com. People, I love that podcast. I love this too. And you'll get to hear Angelique, and she's a woman of great, great wisdom and soulful. And she really is my sister friend. And you would totally love her. And her and David, they're super team. They're goals. Thank you so much for coming, David.
Let me say this. This is your gift. You are so good at this. You're so natural at it. You have a wonderful way of bringing up hard topics. You have a wonderful way of looking at them from both angles, you know, and I think that what you're doing right now is going to save so many people. We can't save the world all at once.
No,
but we can save one relationship at a time. If we can save one marriage at a time, absolutely. If we can have any couples talking about things that they wouldn't have normally talked about, if we can have a different point of view. I love what you're doing. I love being a guest on your show, and you have a gift for doing it. So
thank you so much. Thank you so much. Well, thank you for coming. What can I say? Let's say goodbye to the swans. Take care of you and pay attention. Bye-bye now. Well done for coming to the end of this video. What I want to ask you is, what have you learned? What is your takeaway? And what are you going to start practicing right away? Those three things are how you are going to get the best out of every class here at the Black Swan Relationship Academy. Please put it in the comments so that we can all have a look. So I can have a look, the coaches can have a look, and I promise you, we read every comment. We may not be able to reply to every comment, but we read all your comments, and we want to see how you are growing. And we will see you on the next video.